So we're going to be reading from a parable in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 24. Feel free to follow on the screen or listen along or follow along in your Bibles, whichever you prefer. All right. So Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." I'd like to invite Sam Chan to bring us to our first Feb Talks for this month, The Paradox of Freedom.
So when I was a little Asian kid, I learnt the piano. Like every Asian here, I learnt the piano. And to practice, I would set the oven timer. Like every Asian here, I set the oven timer to practice. But it used to go like this because I wasn't very good. The teacher each week would just give me one line of new music to play, and I would learn it with one hand. Then I would learn it with the other hand. Then I learned it with both hands together. It was long, it was tedious, it was slow. But there was one week where the teacher gave me a line of new music to play, and I kept practicing it over and over again with one hand, then the other hand, then putting both hands together. But no matter how much I practiced, it sounded terrible. Something was wrong. So when I went next week to the teacher, she said, "Oh, you missed the key signature at the start. I was playing the wrong key. I was playing all the wrong notes." And maybe that's how life feels like for us right now. We're playing all the wrong notes. We think we're doing the right things. We're chasing our dreams, but somehow we're miserable, we're exhausted, and we're trapped. So what if we're doing things the wrong way? What if we have things back to front and upside down? So welcome to Feb Talks. This year our topic is this: unleashing the power of paradox, flipping the script on an upside down world. What if we've been doing things the wrong way? And each week we're going to look at a different topic. In week 1 we will flip the script on the paradox of freedom. Next week it will be the paradox of happiness. Then it will be the paradox of money. And then finally the paradox of virtue. But today is week 1. So our topic is this: we're going to flip the script on the paradox of freedom. And to answer this, we're going to look at a story that Jesus tells in the Bible. And this whole month we're going to look at stories that Jesus tells, because in these stories Jesus will show us the paradox in our life, and he'll have a surprise ending, and he'll show us how we too need to flip the script on our upside down world. And today our question is this: what do I have to do to be free? And to answer this question, we've just heard a famous story that Jesus told in the Bible about a young man, a younger son. And in this story, this young man, he too will follow the script. He too will see the paradox. And at the end, he too will flip the script on the upside down world. So let's begin our journey. What is this script that we're talking about? This is a script that we've been given. Do whatever you want, Don't listen to anyone else. Only you can choose what to do. Or as we simply say now, you do you. So let's see how this unravels in the story. In the story that we just heard, Jesus told a story. There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had. He set off for a distant country and there squandered his wealth in wild living. We meet this young man and he says to his father, "I'm out of here." And he takes his father's money and now he's set free. He's free from tradition, free from authority, free from his parents, and he's free to travel. And he's free to spend money how he wants on wild living. This is a story of freedom. For date night, Steph, my wife and I, we once went to a very trendy hamburger bar in the inner city. And because it was very popular with young people, when we got there, there was a long line of people waiting to get in. And there was a long line because everyone, no matter what, everyone had to show ID to prove they were 18. No matter how old or young you looked, you had to show ID. So Steph and I, we get to the back line and we pull out our ID and we go bit by bit, closer and closer, and we finally get to the front and the security guy looks at us and he just waved us in without checking our ID. We go, "Oh, ouch, ouch." At least pretend you need to check our ID. But they check for ID. Why? Because in this story, if you're 18, we will throw freedoms at you. At a pub, you are free to order alcohol. To the government, you are free to travel. With a bank, you are free to spend money. This is the story of unchecked freedoms. Steph, my wife, and I, we lived in the United States for about 5 years, and the USA, they call themselves the land of the free. And it's true, you are free to do anything you want. So if you go to a restaurant in the United States and you want to order the chicken and salad sandwich, you are free to say, "Hey, I want the chicken and salad sandwich, but instead of the chicken, could I please have ham instead? Instead of salad, could I please have cheese instead?" So you can change the sandwich to something completely different. You are free to define reality. You are free to define morality. You are free to define yourself. And it's a great story of freedom. This story of freedom is why you can date whoever you want, not who mum and dad tell you to date. You are free to live in whatever city you want, not the city that mum and dad grew up in. And you are free to choose whatever job makes you happy, not what mum and dad want you to do. So it's a great story of freedom. But if it's such a good story, why are we so miserable, exhausted and trapped? Well, this brings us now to the paradox of freedom. The paradox of freedom is this: if I'm so free, why am I so trapped? Let's have a look at the story. After this young man had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This young man who chased a story of freedom now finds himself trapped. The wheels have fallen off. Why would this happen? Well, this is the paradox of freedom. And the paradox of freedom is this. Paradox number 1, freedom can actually lead to anxiety. Unchecked freedom will lead to anxiety. A few years ago, my wife and I were actually travelling in Italy, and we went to Rome. And apparently in Rome, there's this famous gelato shop you must go to and get gelato. But when we got there, there were like hundreds of flavours to choose from. And we're in this line, and bit by bit, we're getting closer and closer to the front, and we haven't chosen what to order yet. And it was so stressful. We get there right to the front, and Steph, my wife, still could not work out what to order. What should have been a fun moment became a very anxious moment. Or maybe you know that feeling when you go to a restaurant and now you have to choose what to eat. You order pizza, she orders chicken, and then she gets a chicken, you get your pizza, and think, I should have got the chicken. See, there's this moment where too much choice leads to anxiety. This is Barry Schwartz, written this book, TED speaker, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less. Somehow, when we have to choose everything, when we have to choose our version of reality, our version of morality, our version of identity, too much choice actually leads to anxiety. Paradox number 2 is this: freedom can actually lead to loneliness. This is Esther Perel, a relationship counselor, sex therapist, not a Christian that I know of, but she's got this podcast. Millions of people listen to it all over the world. Where should we begin? And in one episode, only a few months ago, this lady rings in and she tells Esther Perel her story. She grew up in a traditional Central American country, but she left that so she could be free from the expectations of tradition, her tribe, her family, to set up a new life in New York City. But now that she's in New York, she's lonely. She's desperately lonely. Sometimes freedom from commitments leads us to loneliness. This is how Mark Sayers explains it. Mark Sayers is a pastor in Melbourne, and he's written his book, The Reappearing Church. He says we have 3 tanks in our lives: freedom, relationships, and meaning. And we need to fill all 3 of these tanks. But we've only got enough to fill, these tanks not fully. So if we want to increase the quality of our relationships, well, our freedom now has to go down, because with relationships comes responsibility. So freedom has to go down. If we want more meaning and purpose in this life, well, again, freedom has to go down, because meaning means there's a story bigger than just our own story that we're living for. But what we've done in the Western world is this: we've gone the opposite way. We have maxed out our freedom tank, and that's left our relationship and meaning tanks empty. And this is why now we have, with unchecked freedom, we live a life of consumerism, hedonism, and individualism. But the cost has been this. The cost is isolation, loneliness, tribalism, paralysis, depression, discontent, confusion, and emptiness. So that's the paradox of freedom. So what can we do now? Oh, paradox number 3. Also, freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free. Now, around about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. every night, in every household, every parent is just telling the kid, go to bed, just go to bed. Why? Because as a parent, if you can get your kid to go to bed, boom, finally, now you can watch Netflix. And with parents, it's not just Netflix. It's Netflix red wine, isn't it? But then now you get what I call the Netflix red wine dilemma or paradox. Because what happens is this: you start your episode of Netflix, you pour yourself a glass of wine, you finish your episode of Netflix, but you're only halfway through your glass of wine, so now you have to start another episode of Netflix. But then now when you finish your wine, you're only halfway through this episode of Netflix, so now you have to pour yourself another glass of wine, and boom, before you know it, it's midnight, and you've drunk a whole bottle of wine again. So I said to a nurse at work, is this a problem? And she said, well, have you had the Netflix screen of shame yet? I said, no, what's the Netflix screen of shame? She says, if you watch Netflix long enough, boom, the screen will go blank and say, are you still watching? And at that moment, you see your own reflection in the screen of the TV, and you think, yes, I am. And I had this mother tell me, she had this awkward experience where she was sitting in front of Netflix, bottle of wine, tub of ice cream, tub of popcorn, chips, chocolate, and her little girl comes wandering in and sees her and goes, oh, this is what mummy does at night. And the answer is yes, because why? We're grown-ups. As grown-ups, you are free to do whatever you want, but there's a price, isn't there? You pay for your freedoms the next day. And we pay for our unchecked freedoms with sleep debt and credit card debt and addictions. Alexander the Great said this of the Persians. He said the Persians will always be slaves. Why? Because they don't know how to say no. Freedom doesn't come free, and our unchecked freedoms lead to addictions, and we actually lose our freedom. That's the price of freedom. So how can we flip the script? Well, let's look what the man does in the story. When the man, the son, came to his senses, he said, "Oh, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out, go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and I have sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. So he ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." The son comes back to the father and he discovers true freedom. The philosophers call it freedom from and freedom for. He's set free, freedom from shame, pain, hurt, regret, and freedom for relationship, belonging, and restoration. This is true freedom. But you think, how is he free? He's come back to his father. Now he has to live in the same house as his father. How is this freedom? Well, there was one time I went out surfing late at night, and I was sitting on a surfboard all by myself at the beach, and it was late at night, and boom, I saw it, some shiny black fins coming towards you. And as a surfer, you're always thinking, it's shark, this is it, these are sharks. But as they come closer and closer, boom, suddenly you see, it's dolphins. And as a surfer, there's this moment of, instant relief, dolphins. But also as surfers, we love dolphins because they're so beautiful. There's a power, there's a beauty and grace to them. They swim, they fly, they flow, they play, they leap, they frolic, yes, but only if they stay in the water. Because when dolphins beach themselves on the sand, suddenly there's no power, there's no beauty, there's no grace. What does this say about freedom? Flipping the script, we are actually at our most free when we live according to our design. Dolphins are designed to stay in the water. That's when you see power, beauty, grace, and freedom. And we are at our most free when we live according to our constraints. And the constraints for a dolphin is water. They are at their most free in that constraint. What is our design? What are our constraints? How can we be free? Well, most people say as human beings, we have been designed for at least these things. We need community. We also need to give rather than take. And we need to worship. We need transcendence. We need meaning. We need purpose. We need something bigger than ourselves. And this son comes back and he is at his most free when he discovers community, giving, and worship. Because the father in the story represents God, our heavenly Father. Jesus says these words, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." What is this truth? The truth is this. We are designed for relationship with God, our Heavenly Father, and we're designed to find this in Jesus. That's why Jesus also says, "Come to me, come to me, come to me." Like the son comes to the father's story, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. But this might be thinking, whoa, yoke? That's this big thing you put on a cow to make it go where you want it to go. Yoke? That's like putting a saddle on a wild horse. Yoke? Jesus, I thought you were talking about being free. Why would I want a yoke? Well, it all comes down to which yoke, whose yoke. See, here's the great paradox of life. A yo-yo is at its most free when it's attached to a string. When it's attached to its string, it can spin, it can fly, it can do loops, you can do tricks with it. But once that string is gone, that yo-yo is useless, can't do anything. We too need the right restraints, the right constraints. Jesus says, let me be that yoke. Let me be that string, and you will be most free. There's a famous theologian, famous Christian convert called Augustine from the 300s. He comes from North Africa. If he was around today, I reckon Augustine would have looked like this. When he was a young man, Augustine had a life of unchecked freedom. He spent his money wildly. He spent his passions wildly. He had romances. He had flings. He had children everywhere. But he was empty. He was trapped. He was miserable. And in his book, The Confessions, he writes this. He says, oh God. Today he would be saying, yo God. So, yo God, you designed, you created, you made us for yourself. That's our design. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Like dolphins playing in water, we too will find our rest in Jesus. Now, do you remember our original story? What is the paradox of freedom? We've been given this script. Do whatever you want. Don't listen to anyone else. Only you can choose what to do. You do you. But today we've seen there's a paradox. If I'm free, why am I so trapped? And we've seen at least 3 paradoxes to freedom. But we can flip the script. We are at our most free when we live according to our design, and we're at our most free when we live according to our constraints. Now, I work as a doctor in the hospital theatres, and I work regularly with surgeons. And there's one particular surgeon I used to work with, and I worked with him for about 5 years. So I started working with him when he was right at the start of his surgical career, a young, promising, upcoming surgeon. And then I worked with him till he became an established, successful surgeon. And this surgeon had everything. He had the skills, he had the charisma, he had the trophy wife, he had the trophy family, he had the trophy house in the eastern suburbs, he had the trophy interior. His house would appear in magazines to showcase the interior. He had the BMW sports car. Once or twice a year, he flew business to Asia and Europe to present papers at conferences. They paid for him to fly. Also, he would ski regularly in Japan and Europe. But I saw the wheels fall off in front of my eyes. A few years later, his wife left him. He never got to see his kids. He'd been unfaithful to his wife. Now he was dating someone much younger than him that he met on Tinder to get revenge on his wife. One day while we're operating, he was struggling to lift his arm to move the operating light. And I said, what's happening? He goes, I think I'm starting to get some arthritis. So now I'm seeing not just his marriage fall apart, his relationships fall apart, his body's falling apart. And then I said, what are you doing for your ski trip this year? He said, none of my friends could make it, so I'm going alone. I said, you're going by yourself. I saw a man who was free, but he was trapped. He was like a caged animal. But it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe you guys know this guy's story, Andrew Chen. He grew up not far from here in Enfield. He went to Homebush Boys High. He too had a life of freedom, which led to him being caged literally in a jail in Bali for trading drugs. While he was in jail, his brother brought him a Bible. He started reading the Bible. Didn't make sense at first, but bit by bit, it started to make sense. And he realized, you know what? I'm designed to be in Jesus. And he writes this in a letter. I said, God, if you're real and if this is true, I want you to free me. And if you do, I'll serve you every day for the rest of my life. I went to my court hearing, but they convicted me and gave me the death penalty. When I got back to my cell, I said, God, I asked you to set me free, not kill me. And God spoke to me and said, Andrew, I have set you free from the inside out. I have given you my life. From that moment on, I haven't stopped worshiping him. I never sung before, never led worship until Jesus set me free. And as you know, a little while after writing this, they did kill him. They tied him to a post. They shot him with a firing squad. While he was waiting to be shot, he sang. He had time to sing 2 hymns. First hymn was Amazing Grace, which we just sung, because my chains are gone, I've been set free. And the second song he got in was 10,000 Reasons, where he got to sing this line, bless the Lord, O my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul, I'll worship your holy name. Now we're going to sing this song in a little while, and I'm going to put it to you, if you can sing those words with your heart and your mind, you'll discover this is what I'm designed for. This is where my soul finds rest, like a dolphin playing with power, beauty, and grace in the water. This is where I'm designed to be, in Jesus, in awe of Jesus, and worshipping Jesus. And I dare you to sing these words in your heart, in your mind, and you'll find true freedom. You will be more free than you've ever been before.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for
Andrew,
the
thanks for having me.
awesome talk. I'm sure that this has been, I think really struck a nerve with everyone here today. We do have a few questions, so let's get into them.
Sure.
I love Q&A time when we have Feb Talks and we do Q&A. So if you do have a question, you haven't sent it in yet, you can still send it if you have that number that was on the screen. So questions are,
Sure.
Is freedom just an illusion? And does it mean we just have to choose a good master?
Wow, I love this because, the whole of society, morality, every worldview is premised, foundationed on we have freedom. We are free to choose. We are free to live. USA Declaration of Independence, everything. Australia's national anthem, we are free. That's one of the opening lines. And yet, atheist philosophers like Yuval Noah Harari point out if there's no God, there's actually no such thing as freedom. Freedom is an illusion because we're in a mechanistic universe of atoms and molecules. Atom 1 hits atom 2, sends it that way. And you and I are really just atoms. We're a bunch of neurons, neurotransmitters. We actually don't have free will. But somehow we all believe we have free will. And so therefore the pushback would be if there is a loving, free God, that's why we too are loving, free creatures. And the whole of morality, I remember watching a Google interview where someone pushed back at Yuval Noah Harari and asked, well, if there's no freedom, where's morality? Where's good and bad? Because you can't punish people for doing bad things if there's no freedom. They had no choice. And I actually watched Yuval Noah Harari struggle to answer that question. In the end, he just said, it's just a convention we've created. There's no such thing as good, bad, right, and wrong. This is just a social contract we've invented. That was the best we'd come up with. But I think we all believe there's such a thing as freedom. That's why we believe in right and wrong. That's why we believe in consequences for right and wrong actions. But if there's freedom, there must be a free, loving creator who set this up for us.
Yeah, nice.
And that was the second half of the question. I can't remember.
Yeah, and should we just choose a good master? Is that what it means?
Yes. I think what I was trying to say is life does have constraints. So good living is choosing the right constraints. So dolphins, their right constraint is water. Their wrong constraint is to be out of water. A yo-yo needs a string. We too need the right constraints. That's part of parenting. That's part of wisdom, choosing right constraints. And that's why Jesus says, let me be that yoke. Let me be your constraint. And in this constraint, you will be most free.
Thank you. Now, I think that's a nice segue to our next questions here. And there's 2 questions here that are kind of dealing with the diagnostic side of it, about why do we have such an issue with freedom. So firstly, why do we pursue freedom even when it's so self-destructive? And the other question here, why has our culture lost relationships and meaning in search of freedom? You know, you had those 3 buckets, and the freedom, relationships, and meaning. So why is our culture so out of balance there?
Yeah. So, and I'll answer this. Remind me the first one.
First one. Why do we? I guess it's personal and cultural, really. Like, why do we always gravitate to freedom and lose the other things? And why does our culture like that? Yeah.
Yes. And so we know what we're free from, but we don't know what we're free for. And I think that's where the Christian worldview really helps. There are 3 parts to the Christian worldview, and if you hold all 3 to be true and intention, suddenly life works really well. Truth number 1 is God is more good, more powerful, more loving than you can imagine. That's truth number 1. Truth number 2, we ourselves are more broken than we dare admit. Like, yes, we're good, but we're also broken people, capable of making bad decisions, capable of sin, guilt, and shame. But the third part is, but Jesus has come to set us free from that and to restore us in a proper relationship with God who loves us. And so if we hold truth number 2, that we're actually more broken than we dare admit, that's why we make bad decisions with our freedom. And the Bible story is Jesus has come to restore our broken wills so they make good decisions, like that son does in the story, to come back to the Father, which is a good decision.
Nice. So the next questions go on from kind of diagnosis of problem, and I've grouped them together. These questions are about kind of practical next steps. So one says, what do you think those 3 buckets, freedom, relationship, and meaning, look like in Christianity? Or does it work differently? And second one is, if freedoms take away our relationships and meanings, how do we practically get the right balance between all 3?
Yeah, and I realise I didn't answer the second half of the last question, but that's all right, we'll tie it up in this one. So, yes, in the West, because we wanted unchecked freedom. I think it's not just that we wanted freedom, because there's good freedom, and God gave us free will, and Jesus says, I will set you free. There's good freedom, but there's unwise, unchecked freedom. That's why Alexander the Great says, well, the Persians, you know, they'll always be slaves because they don't know how to say no. They have unchecked freedom. And so if we have unchecked freedom, we love the idea that there are no relationships, because that means I have no responsibility. I'm not tied down to anyone. But then the trade-off is now we have no meaning, because there's no story bigger than my own story to live for. And that's what we're going to look at next week when we look at the paradox of happiness. We actually do need a story bigger than just our own story to live for. And that's what those buckets are saying. Hey, listen, use your freedom for relationship and for meaning. So as the philosophers say, what's happened right now is we know what we're free from, you know, the authority of parents, teachers, and government. But we actually don't know what we're free for. And we're seeing in that story, we're actually free for community. We're actually free for relationships where you do want to be tied down with responsibility. We're free for giving. There's more joy and freedom in giving rather than taking and consuming. And we're free for worship. And worship just means I have something or someone bigger than me that's worth living for. So if we don't worship anything, we actually have nothing to live for. But if we don't worship God, then we live for all the wrong things that will destroy us, consume us.
Wow, you've got us excited for next week. That sounds really good, to going in and unpacking this more. So I have one question that I've snuck in there for myself. So I know that some people here today will have realised, actually, you've spoke a deep truth here. Jesus is the one who gives freedom and the one who actually gives us that relationship with God. And actually, yeah, I need that in my life. What's the next step for them?
I love how the Bible has this phrase that says, those who call out on the name of Jesus. I think it's as simple as just in your heart, call out to Jesus. Hey, Jesus, if you're real, show yourself to me. I now want to hold these 3 truths in my life. God is way more loving than I dared imagine. I'm way more broken than I dare admit. But I know, Jesus, you can bring me back. And in you, I will find rest. Until I find you, I will be restless without you. But just call on his name. The Bible uses the word faith. Faith basically just means trust. You know, I'm just going to trust that you are who you say you are, and I'm just going to trust this works. Just call out on his name. Just maybe a few other things, like if a friend brought you today, just your friend should turn to you, hey, what do you think? Do you want to read the Bible with me? And you just have to say yes or no. And after you've read the Bible with that person, just say, did you like it? Yes or no. Simple as that. Also, if you like this morning's talk, same talk will be happening this afternoon at 4:30. And if you like this talk, next week's going to be even better. The Paradox of Happiness.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.